Richard, thank you so much for joining me from the UK. That's so exciting.
Thank you very much for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
So, your platform is all about helping others defend themselves and get back on their feet from narcissistic abuse. I just wanted to find out first how you got on this path. What was your personal journey to doing this?
Well, I sort of came across it by accident. The background that I had was in behavioral psychology and in neurolinguistic programming, and we really didn't acknowledge personality disorders at all. So I do have some formal training in psychology, but nothing in personality disorders. It was considered esoteric and weird in the realm of psychoanalytic theory and Freud. Um, and I was actually teaching self-defense. I was running a popular self-defense channel on YouTube. And then I started getting messages from the coaches, a lot of whom were ex-military, who were having problems with whether you would roughly say were like people pleasers. They were being people pleasers in their relationships. They didn't want to see what they would call a shrink. They thought I was okay because I trained and I boxed and stuff, so they're happy to talk to me. So we ended up talking about how to assert yourself and how to develop stronger boundaries. And you can't really push into that area without exploring and coming up against narcissism, narcissistic abuse. Finally, I caved to the requests from my client base who were like, you have to start talking about narcissism. And when I actually investigated it properly, I realized I'd actually experienced a lot of narcissistic abuse in my life.
Mm,
Some romantic relationships, some family relationships, they actually were examples of narcissistic abuse.
right. So I feel like, you hear all the time, oh, he's a narcissist. She's a narcissist. They're such an asshole. I can't deal with them. I feel like it's become something that's used as like a hurtful term and also, and it's all these narcissists probably using it on other people. So I want to get to the heart of exactly, how do you know that you or someone else is a narcissist? Can we go through the symptoms?
Yes. It is an overused term now, a massively overused term, and it's becoming a way of understanding reality, and it's like a filter for relationships. So people come to me and they'll be like, "I just need to know, am I the narcissist or is he the narcissist?" And I'm like,
Right.
"Why have you framed the relationship that way?" Somebody can be an asshole without having a strange and complex a psychiatric condition. It is
Right.
possible. And
Right.
some relationships are not meant to be. Some combinations of people are genuinely toxic. And there is the possibility of emotional abuse existing in a relationship without narcissistic personality disorder being present.
Right.
For me to say that somebody had narcissistic personality disorder, not narcissistic traits, because they're two separate things. If
Okay.
they have narcissistic personality disorder, they've experienced a very heavy level of abuse in childhood that's created a split in them between good messaging and bad messaging. So they probably were the victims of abuse and or neglect at the same time as being told that they were wonderful and amazing for some performative action that they could engage in the world. This then causes them, the adult that you have in front of you, to have given up on reality, and they've chosen delusion. So they've had a psychotic break with reality, and they are now pathologically obsessed with a delusional version of themselves and a delusional story of their lives. Thankfully, that is still rare. That is still quite rare.
And I'm curious, is that something that's tangible that they see that this has happened and they're moving into, they're splitting their personality kind of, or it's something that it just happens?
I don't think that there's never really a conscious choice per se. It's
Mhm.
a way of coping with the trauma that they were raised in. So the psychological term for this is splitting. So they are raised in an environment where a lot of splitting is taking place. Maybe they have parents who are addicts or alcoholics or tyrannically religious. And so
Mhm.
the world becomes split. The parents treat them in a split way. You are wonderful. It's a child. They're good. You are awful. It's a child. They're okay. They're neither amazing and heavenly, nor are they awful and infernal. So they're receiving delusional feedback, and it's contradictory. So it splits the child's mind. The
Mhm.
child's self-perception splits. And then in order to cope with that, they say, well, I'm going to live in one of these two fantasies. There's a fantasy in which I'm amazing and everything is wonderful about me. And there's a fantasy in which I'm awful and everything is awful about me. I'm going to choose the amazing one. But the dynamic that the narcissist lives inside of and treats the recipient, the partner, is one of a split where they're fighting to go to this false reality to escape this false reality. Depending on where they are on the narcissism spectrum, some will cycle more than others. But everybody who's had an experience of a true NPD will have a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde split personality type experience.
Okay. And you said that that's more rare than having the actual traits, correct?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, I differ from other people speaking in this field. I've heard people say that the rates of incidence of narcissistic personality disorder are now as high as 30%. If that were true, our civilization would collapse. I think it's still at the 4 to 5% that it's always been, but narcissistic traits en masse are on the increase. So you can have an otherwise functional human being who's just very, very high in trait narcissism. And our culture actively encourages that. We can't deny it. That is still a problem, and it still makes them very difficult interpersonally, but that is fixable with therapy. That is fixable with an intervention. Narcissistic personality disorder is not.
Got it. Okay, so I want to talk about you talk about 9 traits that people have, and you can remember them with the code special me. Can you get into some of those, if not all, so that people can really tangibly understand what they are looking for in themselves or in others?
So you've got a sense of entitlement that they should be treated as different to other people. You've got interpersonally exploitative behaviors. They're bullying. They're envious. They are vengeful. They're heavily invested in an artificial sense of self. They lie frequently because they're living inside of a fantasy version of reality. And the experience of being around them is destructive. Now, that's the last one is the tricky one inside of psychiatry, because they haven't quite decided, because all of this, I'm using the American system, I'm using the American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. They don't seem to have made their minds up, because they vote on these disorders via committee, whether it's adaptive or maladaptive. So in the Trump election, you had some psychiatrists saying that's narcissistic personality disorder. And then the guy who headed the committee for the DSM-5 said it's not, because Trump is successful. And that means, not to derail this into politics, but he's a good open example. And
he's a great example. Yeah.
It was a polemic that took place publicly with the that then started to involve the American Psychiatric Association. Never in the history of psychiatry had so many clinicians come together to say publicly, you shouldn't have that man in office because we think he's mentally ill. They're not supposed to do that.
Right.
So they couldn't decide whether it was adaptive or maladaptive. And there's still an open-ended question. If I'm hurting you, but I don't hurt me, is that a personality disorder? Is it or is it? So if I'm very successful and you suffer, but I'm fine, is that a personality disorder? And they haven't quite resolved that one. But roughly speaking, when you're looking at the 9 traits, that's the type of thing people should be looking for.